Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's very special SMM Connect webinar event. Are your key accounts vulnerable? Are you sure? With David Yesford and Vivek Chandramohan. We're very happy to welcome them to today's event. It is going to be a great event, and it's a continuing partnership with Wilson Learning. So many great webinars over the years. Make sure you check the webinar archive for all of the great recordings, and don't forget to register for the next upcoming event. You can do that on the lower left there. Elevating clients to fierce advocates, the power of post-sale mastery. And then David's going to give you the heads up on a special event that's so new that it hasn't even posted yet, but he'll have more on that here a little bit later. And speaking about a little bit later, well, this is me anyway. I am with Training Magazine Network and SMM Connect. Very glad to have you with us here today. You can send me a private chat in the background by selecting host in the chat, and then get me a message in the background, and I promise to assist you as soon as possible with any kind of technical assistance. But I was about to say that Wilson Learning is going to post at the end of today a very special article related to today's content. So make sure you do stick around. Here's some upcoming webinars that I know that you'll want to register for. Register for all of these great events at smmconnect.com/calendar. Check the calendar frequently. We have so much great content coming your way. We add frequently to the upcoming webinars. And speaking of which, again, I know that you'll want to register for this coming up on March 14th with Michael Leimbach and David Yesford, elevating clients to fierce advocates, the power of post-sale mastery. If you don't already follow us on what was formerly Twitter and now X, do so. You can do so by joining at SMM Connect US, at SMM Connect US. Do that today because we have a lot of special announcements that come your way through that platform. And also, if you don't already or you haven't already signed up for salesandmarketing.com, the special reports, SMM focused reports, do so. You can click on your screen or go to salesandmarketing.com/reports, completely free from SMM Connect. This event is in partnership with Wilson Learning Worldwide. We want to thank Wilson Learning for their continuing partnership with us. For more information on everything that they do, go to the link you see or just click on your screen, global.wilsonlearning.com. So now let's get today's event started. Are your key accounts vulnerable? Are you sure? With David Yesford and Vivek Chandramohan. David and Vivek, welcome to SMM Connect.
Hello, and thank you, Philip. Thank you also to SMM Connect and Gary Van Antwerp. This has been such a great partnership, Philip. You mentioned that for a long time. It's actually 9 years. I think it's going on 9 years. I said more
Yes.
than 8, but I think it's going on 9 years. We love doing these. We love working with the SMM Connect team. SMM Connect makes this webinar process so simple. It really just allows us to focus on speaking and engaging with you in the audience. Got to mention this platform too. Thank you for our ability to use Adobe Connect for these webinars. We love using this platform, and it makes it easy for us to navigate through the webinar and keep track of your comments and questions. I wasn't going to do this, but I'll do this in the intro, Philip, because you mentioned it. We do have a session that's happening on Thursday, April 18th, and the title of it is Voice in the Machine, Mastering Selling Authenticity in an AI-Driven World. With AI being such a, everywhere, you need to talk about it. And you need to talk about how it impacts sales. So we'll talk about that overall. We haven't written the description yet, so that's why it's not up there yet, but it'll be something we're looking forward to doing. Today, though, welcome to Are Your Key Accounts Vulnerable? Are you sure? For this session, we're leveraging the expertise that Vivek Chandramohan has in implementations that focus on building strategic and key accounts. We actually pulled Vivek in the middle of his night at 12:30 a.m. tomorrow morning for him to join us on this because of some of the expertise and the clients that he's worked with that really add value to the topic that we're talking about. And specifically, what's going on in the industry that sort of caused us to think that this was a good topic. And one of the things that we've seen are buyers are just simply buying differently. You always say that, a year ago, 2 years ago, we'd say that, but it is really dramatic in terms of how they're buying. Customers who always bought from us in the past, they've just stopped buying and they haven't come back. Multiple decision makers more than ever are part of the process. And frankly, the deals seem to be smaller and smaller because our traditional buyers no longer have the budget authority that they used to. That's what we're going to talk about today, and we're going to look at some strategies and tactics around that. If you've attended any of the Wilson Learning webinars in the past with SMM Connect, you know that we'll have a robust conversation and a discussion on this topic, and we invite you to come along. We encourage your reactions and questions. Please just put those in chat. We love seeing that stuff in chat. And what we'll do is we'll pause throughout and integrate your thoughts and questions into what it is that we talk about. So let's get started today. I'm pleased to introduce Vivek Chandramohan as our co-host for the webinar today. Are your key accounts vulnerable? Are you sure? Vivek?
Thanks, David. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here, and I'm really looking forward to this. Just a quick introduction. I know I haven't been on these webinars before. In my role, I manage Wilson Learning's Asia Pacific region, and over several years, I've worked with a number of different organizations, but also different clients across several parts of the world, helping sales strategy and improve overall sales effectiveness. So I'm very excited to be here, and thank you for having me. All right. So with that said, one of the things that I thought we'd do was to start with a little bit of effort from your side. As David mentioned, we love to hear some of the inputs coming in from you. So I'd like all of you to help us get started by answering this question that you see on your screen. What are the main challenges you have in retaining and expanding your accounts? So please type your responses in the chat, and we'll process that as we get those responses in. We see some.
I see people typing in or starting
Typing,
to type
yeah.
in. There we go.
Purchasing seems to be one of the functionality not returning to the office. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Clients have
Clients have
budget cuts,
budget cuts.
tons, annual price increases. Yeah.
Keep up with inflation. Yeah, absolutely.
I've heard also changing buyers. You know, my main contacts of,
Yeah.
so as I'm trying to expand an existing accounts, people leave.
Yeah.
Changes in the buying process.
And yeah.
What else? Viv, what do you hear?
Well, in terms of challenges, again, a lot of things, right? So unique, specialized players coming in and sort of taking niche parts of the business where you might have had a larger piece of the pie overall. So that again is sort of bringing people, automatically reducing the amount of work that people do by working with several different partners who are specializing in different sections of what you might have offered earlier.
Yep.
So that's one of the big things. The other thing too is around being able to mitigate risk from the client side to be able to then, that's one of the driving forces with so many changes, business continuity, hybrid work, all of that being a priority for customers and their customers.
Yep.
Having that flexibility is becoming more and more important. In many ways, having a single supplier who can help with a lot of things is starting to be seen as a somewhat of a disadvantage, whereas
Yep.
just a few years ago it was seen as a huge advantage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Viv, we got Carla came in with, to your point about
Yeah.
hybrid working, relationship building is harder than it was
Harder, yeah,
previously.
absolutely.
I'd say it's harder, but if we look at it as different,
It's different, yeah.
it might be a way to sort of position that differently, Carla. I'm sure it's harder, but
Yeah.
it's just different requirements. Okay, good. Keep this stuff
Yeah.
coming in. We'll keep going, and we'll add it as we need to go
Yeah.
along. Go ahead, Viv.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for those inputs. And like David said, keep those coming in. So what we wanted to do today, and we acknowledge all of these responses, and I'm sure there'll be many more that we haven't covered, but keep those coming in. So what we wanted to do today was to, with all of these going on, to give you a perspective on taking a structured approach to protect accounts that are strategically important to you. The way we want to do this is by talking about a point of view that we call the zone of indifference. This is really starting to make a big impact in the way that customers perceive their suppliers, but also in the way that traditionally we might have thought about what our customers value and how those things are different going forward. We'll also talk about 3 key strategies that can help you address these vulnerabilities and move forward to retain and grow your accounts. Ultimately, at the end of this conversation, we hope that you will have some options to consider to proactively protect your accounts and, of course, grow them and continue to build business in the future.
So as we look at key accounts and we put key accounts in the topic, you'll hear us sort of talk about key accounts, strategic accounts, big, large accounts. Here's the reality: every one of these accounts, whatever you call them, is unique. And they're unique on two levels. First, there's no real single approach. We do development. We teach sales effectiveness, and we know that there's not one single program, one single thing. Because of the way that you might organize your key accounts, strategic accounts, or large accounts, you've got to integrate into what your current process, and then what skills are needed from that process. So we do know and recognize that. So the comments that we're going to talk about are in general things that should be paid attention to. You may or may not like one or any of them, the comments, to add them. But again, the intent is for them to be more modular in terms of the way that we look at it. Not only are key accounts different, how you run the process, and how the customers sort of interact with you. We also know that inside your organization, every account manager, again, no matter what the size of the account they have, they're leading a team, orchestrating the resources of your organization on behalf of the customer. And they're valuable resources, and so they need to be used effectively. And so every employee is part of that team, and you need to pay attention to how do you develop those people? How do you make sure that the team is sort of a cohesive team available to support all the sales initiatives? So we wanted to say that before we started and before we got going. And then let me start then again with another poll that we'd like to talk to you about. One of the things we talk about is in the title, are your key accounts vulnerable? Are you sure? So you all came to this session, mainly because of the title and the description. So I guess the question we'd ask you is, what percentage of your key accounts do you believe are vulnerable right now? So go ahead, and again, we have a poll up. It'll be like a racetrack kind of a thing. So we'll see, as we'll do it as we go along. Is it less than 25%, 25 to 50, 51 to 75, and then more than 75%? What do you got? It looks like, again, it's a bit of a horse race right now. Let's take about another 30 seconds or so, get everybody in terms of what we got here. Let's now go ahead and close this. We just got 25, less than 25% actually jumped up.
Right.
40% of the folks out there said that less than 25% of your key accounts are vulnerable. The next one is more than 75% are vulnerable. That's in second place with 30%. And so interesting information, Vivek.
Yeah, it is interesting information, and it's sort of coming in at the two extremes.
And quite frankly, it's a perfect setup for the zone of indifference, which is what we'll talk about.
Absolutely, yeah. And so earlier we talked about understanding the concept of what we call zone of indifference. Now, just taking a moment to sort of explain what we mean here, and before we continue, we often tend to look at satisfaction and dissatisfaction as sort of two ends of the same continuum, right? So if you're satisfied, great. If not, you must be dissatisfied. But as we think about understanding customer satisfaction, we all know when customers are satisfied with what we offer, there's a tendency for them to buy more from us or continue to buy what they're already buying. But when we think about this as two separate continuums, where there could be varying levels of satisfaction, but also varying levels of dissatisfaction, what we found was that the opposite of satisfaction was not dissatisfaction, it was something else. And the opposite of dissatisfaction was not satisfaction, it was something else. And that something else is indifference. The clients that we have today, and owing to all of those reasons that all of you mentioned just a little while ago in the chat, there is a tendency for a lot of our customers to be indifferent to what we're offering, meaning loyalty, as we used to be able to define it, is sort of coming down. Interestingly, when we look at across industries, across the whole spectrum of buyers and products and things like that, we find that close to about 80% of customers tend to be in the zone of indifference. Right now, there are highly satisfied customers. Great, we know what to do with them. There are highly dissatisfied customers. Great, we know what to do with them. But oftentimes, customers talk to you about being, yeah, everything's going okay, but a lot of times it's fueled by indifference. And like I said, 80%, up to 80% in many cases of customers tend to fall in the zone of indifference. And what we want to be able to do is to, given that situation, it becomes even more critical for us, when it comes to key accounts, to ensure that our customers are not in that zone of indifference, but we can do certain things to move them into that satisfied zone, so that we can continue to work with them and build on our existing relationships with them. So, with that said, what we wanted to talk about was key account strategies that we want to share with you. So the first thing we want to do is to be able to look at what are some of the things we can do to protect our existing accounts. Of course, we want to retain those accounts, but retention alone only limits what we can do with the account. But how do we also then think about what are some of the ways in which we can grow and expand further than what we're doing into these accounts? And ultimately, with all of the things that are potentially at risk, with everything that you've said in terms of restrictions, changes in personnel, um, not returning to the office, budget cuts, all of that. It's also important to understand and plan for how do you source new logos and convert those into new accounts. So those are the three things that we're going to talk about in a little more detail as we go along. So let's take a look at the first one.
Hey, Viv, I'm actually not going to go to the first one. I'll talk about that in a second,
Sure.
and we'll talk about protect. But I
Mhm.
do want to go back here,
Okay.
because again, there's a couple things that I think are worth putting an underline on.
Hmm.
The first one is, just before this, we did the poll,
Yeah.
and there was a group that actually said 75% or more of my
Right. Yeah.
accounts are at risk, but then less than 25 are at risk for another group of everybody. And the data obviously says something different, right? Because there is a
Yeah.
significant amount. But that begs a question. If I press 25%,
Yeah.
the question that begs is, say, so you're telling me 80%.
Yeah.
How do I know? How do I know that they're there? What do I need to do? Is there something I can do to actually
Absolutely.
find
Yeah.
out? Besides the strategies we're going to talk about now, is there something else we can do?
Hmm. Yeah. One of the things that we often talk about, David, is how do you know that? So the only way to know that is to ask. So are you getting expressions of satisfaction from your customers, and what do they look like? Are they actively engaging with you and providing those kind of um, inputs that let you validate that, in fact, yes, they are um, satisfied with what you're doing?
Okay, Jeff.
Absolutely, Jack.
There we go.
Yeah.
Touche. He threw that right at everybody. That is very good. But I think again, it's really interesting, and we are talking about this in our next webinar that we're doing next month. That Philip announced at the beginning of the session. It really is about post sale mastery. How do you become a post? How do you deal with post sale mastery? And part of that is asking for statements of satisfaction and some of those kind of things. And we don't do that a lot of times because, again, I think
Yeah.
we assume that if they don't say something that they're satisfied, right?
Yeah.
If they smile at us and buy, that they're satisfied. But the reality is, at some point, they may just stop buying, and we don't know why. And it feels like we're
Yeah.
blindsided because we didn't ask, right?
Yeah, and sometimes it's also the old fear of, what if I find something I don't want to find out, right?
Yeah.
It's no news is good news kind of situation in some
Don't
cases.
ask a question you don't want to know the answer to.
Yeah.
Exactly. So as Vivek set this up, there's the three strategies: protect, grow, and expand, and then source new logos. I want to talk a little bit about protect, and really the key here is an assumption that says the best offense is defense. That's really what we're talking about here when we talk about protect. And there's two aspects of it. One is called value creation strategies. I'm not going to talk a lot about that one. I'm actually going to talk about the account behavior spectrum a little bit more. But I do want to talk just briefly about some critical things in the value creation strategies, and they include what we call switching costs and system benefits, right? So switching costs are more the price the buyer has to pay for changing suppliers or substituting products or services, right? That's the switching costs that you want to have. System benefits are really the benefits that you get from buying multiple products, multiple services from the same vendor, right? That's again what you're. There are a couple things when you think about value creation strategies. When we talk about account behavior spectrum, what we talk about is, or the reason that we talk about it is that um, the critical thing that you're trying to do with the account behavior spectrum helps you understand is how do you create an offering that complements the customer's buying processes and priorities? That's the purpose of understanding how they buy, and the account behavior spectrum articulates that. We have two ends of the spectrum. One is called relationship, one is called transactional. So a relationship buyer, for all intents and purposes, when we look at a relationship buyer, what they're doing is typical of a relationship buyer is they want to purchase part of a series. So my point about this is my purchase of one product or service affects my next purchase, which affects the next purchase. So it's really more of a series of things that I'm buying over a longer time horizon. As a result of that, there's also a perceived higher risk. What if I pick the wrong company? What if they don't have all the stuff that I need? Right? So there's a higher risk. And the reason it's a high risk is because if I get going with one company and then they fail, it's hard to change, right? Because I've put a series of things, I've built a lot of things that are in terms of how I think about my strategy going forward based on continuing to buy products and services. A transactional buyer is basically, when you think about it, they think more about separate purchases. So just because I bought from you before doesn't mean I'm going to buy from you again. They're separate. They're clearly separate. It doesn't mean they're not going to buy from you. So that's not the point. It's just that you can't say, well, they bought from us before, so they're going to buy now again. They usually are thinking much more on a short-term horizon, solve my problem now. And as a result, they can move quickly, so it's lower risk and it's easy to change. Right? That's what a transactional buyer is. And when we'll talk more about some of the characteristics, but it's really, again, important for you to understand how does the customer want to buy, because the way the customer wants to buy influences how you position your product or service for the client to buy, right? So that's how you think about it. That's why it's important. Again, this is in Protect. And so you need to continue to pay attention to what's going on. The best strategy, by the way, when you think about transactional, because there are a lot of transactional buyers, especially early in a relationship, the best you can hope for then is to get to more of a repeat transactional. That's ultimately what you're trying to do. So let me talk about relationships. I mentioned relationship. It's on the far left-hand side of that continuum that I had before. You notice that it was a capital R. And we think about relationships two ways. There is what we call the big R relationships, and you'll hear me talk about in a second, the little R relationships. A big R relationship is an organization to organization, company to company, right? So when we think about the overall relationship and how we were talking about it on the previous slide, that R is organization to organization over there. It's ultimately influenced by economics. So a relationship buyer wants the advantage of buying from you over time. They want that, which means they want discounts. They want maybe probably a longer term contract that gives me a better price. That's what they're paying attention. That's what they're paying for. And a lot of they also recognize in the big R relationship there's costs associated with that change. Those are the switching costs and the system benefits that I talked about earlier. Now, a little R relationship, that runs, it doesn't matter on that continuum on the previous slide. It doesn't matter if you're in the R and the T. The little R relationships are person to person. You have to do this. This is part of what you hear when you talk about and you hear the conversation about being a trusted advisor. That's about, earning trust with individuals in the buying process. Again, it's more about you as a salesperson, them as the buyer individual in terms of what you think about it. So you're dealing much more with psychology than costs associated with the change. So let me give you a little bit of tips here in terms of how you can understand if your clients are relationship or transactional buyers right now, especially the ones that you want to keep and you want to build that longer term relationship and really in the area that we're in now, Protect. So we'll think about this in three ways. The first one is the customer's perception of your offering. On the right-hand side, if the customer perceives the uniqueness of your product as more of a commodity and it's more of a standalone, meaning it doesn't need to integrate with systems and processes inside your organization, they're more of a transactional buyer. Your product or service might lead to more transactional buyers as the kind of customers you deal with. However, if your product is very significantly differentiated, so the uniqueness is very specific in terms of what's there, and there is a high degree of integration that's required of the systems and processes, in those particular cases, the relationship buyer is counting on the company to help me with the integration. And so it's more of a company to company kind of a thing that you do. When you look at sort of the level of expertise of the customer, so this is of the customer. If the customer's extensive knowledge of your product and there's a low perceived risk, that's transactional. They can do it themselves. Again, it lends themselves to picking and choosing from vendors to go through. Whereas if customer has little product expertise, they don't know the product really well, and therefore then there's probably a pretty high perceived risk. Again, I need the company to be stable and to help me with that integration. That's more of a company to company, more of a relationship. And then finally, when you look at the external circumstances, if there's industry standards that are out there, so there's very specific kinds of things that are standards around what this product or service is about, the industry or the product is deregulated, and that the technology is relatively open and easy to replicate. Again, that speaks more to a transactional buyer. Whereas if there's not very many industry standards, it's very restrictive in terms of the regulation, and there's probably newer proprietary technology. You need company to company. It's more of a relationship.
David, I have a question here. A lot of salespeople would earlier at least would be very proud of the fact that they were very strong relationship builders, right?
Yep.
And unfortunately, whether what market's telling them or based on recent experiences, a lot of salespeople that I talk to feel like, yeah, it's harder to build those relationships, or it's relationship sales is sort of dead, as someone had said earlier as well. So if one of the questions that I often get asked is if I have a transactional buyer, um, can I move them, to be more relationship? What does that look like? Is that something that people should be trying for?
Well, again, I think you got to bring in the big R, little r conversation in this
Yeah,
perspective,
yeah.
right? And so I think that's where the salesperson asking the question is not necessarily making a distinction to that. So
Hmm.
so here's the one thing. If a lot of times in transactional, I have a buyer right now
Hmm.
that is working with me, and from a relationship standpoint, sort of like, here's what I want. Thank you very much. Let's not talk about stuff, and don't ask me questions more about it. There's
Yeah,
nothing I can do
yeah.
to sort of move them to more R on the account behavior spectrum. My only task right now is to make sure I create opportunities where I can talk to them and find out and understand more about how my service is being integrated into what they do, and offer
Hmm.
suggestions about how to do that. So I can be more little r, and absolutely need to be more little r in today's world, in the long tail of the pandemic. Relationship and trust is paramount, and
Yeah.
so you have to try more relationship kinds of activities to build that trust. As we said earlier, I forget who said it earlier, about relationship is harder because you're in a virtual hybrid kind
Yeah.
of environment. But there are, again, if your intent is clear about what you're trying to do, help advance the customer, even if they keep you at bay because they understand about the product and they don't want to have too much talk about that, you still can do things to sort
Hmm.
of move to more small R relationship, and it's absolutely critical. But your product or service may just lend itself to more transactional kind of a buy,
Yeah,
right?
that's important too. Yeah.
Right. So
And I think expectations and definitions of relationships may also need to be altered in salespeople's minds to be able to facilitate. Yeah, it's changed, but it doesn't mean that it's sort of gone. It's
yep,
taken a different shape, and that, like you said, that little r might be
yep.
ways in which you can move that needle along. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the other thing is too is let me go down and give a little bit of a the point here is to not try and it's really about sort of aligning with how the customer wants to buy, not changing their buying processes, right? So
Right. Yeah.
your better bet, because the question comes from, I want more security in my buying process, right? I
Right.
want to know that I can count on these guys more. That's why I want to move it from transactional to more relationship. But the reality is your tactic, your strategy should be much more about making sure that you're aligning right now with how the customer wants to buy. And a couple tips that I want to give. So if we think about relationship, left hand side of that chart, a
Mhm.
relationship buyer wants to leverage the relationship with the vendor for lots of extras. They want free consulting. They
Yeah.
want extra coordination. As I said before, they want volume discounts. They love innovation and what innovation you can offer, and they do want a single supplier. Right?
Yeah.
It's great if you can get there. Not everybody wants to buy that way, but if you are there, what you want to do in terms of what you should offer is to make sure that anything you offer avoids alienation with the installed base. You don't want to give them any reason to not go with you because there's friction in the
Right.
relationship, friction in the delivery of the product or service. And that means that you have to pay attention to the cross-functional impact on the client. You
Right.
change the way that you interact with the client. You want to minimize those disruptions, as I said, but you also need to be prepared to customize what you have and really make sure that what you are putting forward, maybe not off the shelf, but is customized to what they have. On the same side, if you look at a transactional buyer, they want an immediate solution to today's problem.
Yeah.
Basically, they want to focus on price, feature, delivery. That's what they want. That's what they care about. They also want the freedom to shop around. We
Yeah.
sometimes salespeople think about that as a threat, but
Right.
again, that's what the transactional buyer wants to do. You need to provide for them the value in terms of what it is, why they would continue to come back to you, but they do want multiple suppliers. So your offering should be competitive in price. Obviously, pay attention to that. Satisfy the goals of the individual user. But the one thing that's really important is this concept of value add. So, um, value add. Oftentimes, as salespeople, we listen to R&D and marketing, and they tell us how cool our product is and all the value adds with that, but the
Yeah.
customer doesn't care.
Yeah.
When I'm saying value add, when we're saying value add, what we mean is it's low cost to the supplier, so low cost to you as the deliverer of the product and service, and high value to the client. That's what you're
Yeah.
looking for, and that's what your discovery in the small R kinds of things are looking for is what does that client, what motivates that client, what is something you might be able to do. Again, this low cost on your side, high value for them.
Yeah, thanks, David. And so, in terms of protect, we're really talking about creating the value strategies and understanding account behavior spectrum to be able to influence the value perception that the customer has, to be able to then protect what you already have. As we begin to think about you know the next stage in this in the process, which is about how do we grow this account. So again, here we're going to talk about two concepts. One is strategic business calling, in terms of what you can do, but and then we'll take a look at what we call critical success factors. Strategic business calling, in the way that we talk about it, is really a non-product oriented business call at different strategic level call points, in addition to your primary contact. So all of you, as part of your key accounts, have primary contacts that you mostly work with. This is really much more about um, how do you figure out who are the other people in the organization who you can talk to, who might be at a more strategic call point, but have a non-product oriented call with them in addition to your primary contact. And the way to do this is first, obviously, for lots of different reasons, political, relationship, maintenance, etc. You want to manage that primary contact. You don't want to be um, seen that you're jumping the gun and going to somebody else outside of your primary contact, and that sort of hurts what you already have and then doesn't get you what you want either. So once you're able to manage that primary contact, influence their value perception, you want to understand what are some of the things that are going to be critical in gaining access to those strategic call points, and then of course conduct the strategic business call. In being able to do this, in terms of conducting the strategic business call, or even when you're trying to gain access, um, it's really important to understand that strategic interests um, are different at different levels, right? So, and your particular product or service may not always. So we often talk about. I often talk to salespeople who say, "Oh, we need to call higher," or sales managers who say, "We need to call as high as possible." Yes, but it's also important to understand what strategic call points are relevant for you and your business, and being able to then call appropriately in there. And in doing so, it's important to recognize that interests at different levels are different. So, for instance, at the operation level, if you have a call point there, typically they're concerned about product, price, features, and most of the time, a lot of salespeople are already having these conversations. So it's less likely that this will be your strategic call point. Mid management in certain cases can be, depending on the size of your account, depending on the size of your organization, as well as the size of your customer organization. Again, here we're talking about interests that could be responsible for, business processes, uh, big picture on how key processes work, improving efficiency, provided results on time, those kind of things. And as we go further up into the executive layer, this is really much more about the mission, creating value for the stakeholder, the strategic direction that the organization wants to go in. And in each of these segments of strategic interests, what you want to be able to do is to understand, when you're having this conversation, to be able to align what you're talking about in your questions with these interests. And while doing so, try and understand what are their critical success factors. And when we talk about critical success factors, what we mean is those few key areas of activity in which favorable results are absolutely necessary in order for organization to achieve its goals. So critical success factors really are, I mean, they're few in number, right? So you've got to look at 3 or 4 primary areas. And there are some characteristics to critical success factors that I'll just quickly go over. First of all, they can be generic to an industry. So for instance, if you're in the automobile business, supply chain is always going to be an industry, always going to be a critical success factor. If you're in medical equipment or pharmaceuticals, then quality is always going to be a critical success factor. That's across the board for all organizations in that space. um, the second key characteristics is that of critical success factors is that it can vary from company to company at any given point in time. While quality or supply chain management could be a priority for the entire industry, for a particular organization it could be more or less important at that given point in time. And the last thing about critical success factors is that they are the means to the goal, right? So they're not the goal itself. These are few areas in which success is required for you to be able to, for the company to be able to get to its goal. So when you are conducting these strategic business calls at different call points, it's really important to understand the critical success factors of those stakeholders and what is important for them to be able to achieve their goal. And so that once you understand that with clarity, you can then talk about what are the different ways in which you can help them achieve those goals.
Hey, Viv,
Yeah.
um, play out for a minute the strategic business call process, and let me explain a little bit more about what my question
Yeah.
is, because I'd like to hear your perspective. When I've seen this
Mm-hmm.
work, strategic
Mm-hmm.
business calls, when you look at calling across the organization, it does a lot for the salesperson. It gives them a lot of access to people. Again, because it's
Mm-hmm.
non-product oriented, you're not going and talking about your product. You're able to have a business
Yeah.
conversation, which is what you hear from executives that they want to have with salespeople is a
Mm-hmm.
business conversation. Don't tell me about your product. So the perception of the salesperson increases just by doing that. But
Mm-hmm.
then if you play it out where you've got multiple conversations across multiple functions in an organization, the net
Mm-hmm.
often is that you as a salesperson know about more about that company than any one of the individuals inside that company knows. And
Yeah.
as we all
Absolutely.
strive to be trusted advisors, right?
Yeah.
We all think about how do we be trusted advisors with knowledge about our product. But what if you're
Yeah.
trusted advisors about knowledge about their organization, and not only
Mm-hmm.
where your product or service can help, but just other things that they might need to do because of where you've been?
Yeah.
I may have just answered the question, but how do you see that play out any more than what I just said?
No, I agree with that, David. It's true because one of the things that it throws up, especially if you're talking to multiple stakeholders, is you start to get a different perspective and start seeing a whole other picture of the way that the business works, and ultimately, um, you start to really see not what value your product or service adds to your customer, but really what value they are offering their customers. And that's a
Exactly.
whole other position or a place to be in, because now you're influencing their thought around the market. You're challenging them to think about what are the different ways in which their customers are being affected by their actions.
Right.
And you move well into that zone, which is well beyond your product and service. And that's why that
Yeah.
non-product part is really critical about that strategic business goal. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the more that you think about and consider the customer's customer, the
Yeah.
more you become what we call a counselor salesperson, right? It's really about how
Hmm.
do you advance that customer's business by understanding how they impact the marketplace. And again, you have much more value from that perspective.
Yeah.
And again, more credibility. As a quick example of this, we had a customer, I'd say it's about 8 years ago, and this is a Wilson Learning example. But they bought one of our training courses. They said, "Well, we got to help. We got to help our salespeople. You've got a good training course. Why don't we put people through it?" So we put
Hmm.
people through it. We actually had impact with them, even though we didn't have a lot of discovery on. We had impact with them, but our salesperson then went and did strategic business calls across the organization. And next thing you know, we've got a sales training program in another division. And then the next thing
Hmm.
you know, in another division. So a transactional now has become a repeat transactional. And to your question to me before, how do you become more relationship oriented? we were able to, through the understanding how they impacted their customer, to be able to make an argument that actually moved us into more transactional, and we ended up with a $1 million contract every
Hmm.
year for a long time, in terms of what
Yeah.
that process was. So that's an example of how you can do that. Not saying that strategic business calls the target is the way by which you get yourself to more relationship, but
Yeah.
it is an important thing in the context of however the customer wants to buy, for you to be a better salesperson and help them solve their problem.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Cool.
I agree with that.
Yeah, let's talk about the third piece of it. We talked first about protect, right? You got to protect what you have. Then inside of what you have, you want to grow and expand. So your audience in that case are your existing key accounts, strategic accounts, large accounts. But we also know that there's a percentage of accounts that you lose no matter what you do because of different strategies within the client organization. So there's statistics that say you might lose up to 30% of your customers that you do
Yeah.
every year. And so you got to replace those. And so that's got to be part of your key account strategy, is how are you finding new larger accounts? And so how do you source new logos? So let's talk about a couple ways that you think about this. And this is really, you're going to see this as traditional prospecting. I'm going to reference you to, again, to the archives. We have a webinar just on prospecting, but let's talk about this here. And we think about prospecting as the act of efficiently finding and accessing potential customers who fulfill two characteristics. First, they're good for us.
Hmm.
Second, we're good for them. So let's break that out a little bit more. When we talk about they're good for us, ultimately there are criteria for what is the ideal customer for us. It might be size of organization, it might be revenue, it might be local or global. I mean, there's a whole, it might be in a specific industry. What you want to do is be really clear about what are the top priority criteria that you use to look at the raw market, whatever you define your raw market as, whether it's everybody out there or you use Zoom Info and kind of cut through some of the stuff to find sort of the list, the smaller list of the marketplace of companies that are good for us. And you start there because it doesn't make any sense if we're good for them if they might not be good for us in the first place. So you want to cut that
Hmm.
first on good for us. The second, and we call that a suspect filter. So
Yeah.
out of that filter that you're looking at, you're going to now identify your suspects. Those suspects you have to put through a second filter. It's a prospect filter. And this is where the research comes into play. You're identifying um, what inside of each one of these accounts that you've identified as suspects, what about what they're doing is something that your product or service can satisfy. And you'll need to then go, you can use AI for this. We'll talk about this in
Hmm.
a few months. But you can also use Zoom Info. You can use some of those other sort of kinds of things that allow you to understand what's going on, trends, things they might be looking for on the websites and everything in terms of problems. You might also go to, and what I like to do is go to the annual report, look at the MD&A, see what the executives are talking about or critical issues that you have. What you're trying to do is to build your argument for why that company and a specific individual in that company should talk to you, right? They have a
Yeah.
problem that you can solve, basically, is what it is you need to do. And from there, you then need to build an effective access message. So you've got the right person, and you need to make sure, to Vivek's point earlier about the critical success factors, obviously your message has got to be meeting the interests of the different levels. If you're talking to an executive or if you're talking to operations, there's going to be different messages that you might look at. So the right person dictates sort of the right message and so on. But your objective in doing an access message is to promise help and ultimately get an appointment. Now, there's a very, very simple um, uh, framework that helps you with access messages, because Vivek, I don't know about you, but I know that one of the things that we run into oftentimes is when you look at people's access messages, it's really long and there's a
Hmm.
lot of things in it, right?
Yeah, and a lot of information about you, or whoever's writing
But
the,
yeah,
yeah,
about
me.
me
Yeah,
as a
exactly.
salesperson,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Or my company. Yeah, in that sense.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. I work for this company, blah 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 blah. So here's the framework. And Viv helped me with this if I forget any of the pieces, but it is
Sure.
relatively simple. The first one is
Yeah.
you need to introduce yourself, and here's an understanding. People don't care who you are.
Yeah.
Again, as blunt as that is, they don't care right now. And there's all kinds of ways that we use in sales to talk about they don't care who you are until they know how much you care, those kind of things. But the reality is,
Right.
this is your first contact. They don't know. They don't know who you are. They don't know why you're contacting them. So don't spend time on that. Spend time on your research and what we call an active ping. And here's the thing that you go when you're doing your research, you might find 4 or 5 things that you can help with. The reality is you get a chance to ask one and only find one that seems to be the biggest priority. And what you're looking for is a statement that says, we see that you have a need for, your CEO has articulated the need to increase revenue by the end of this quarter. That's a critical challenge. We've helped companies do this
Hmm.
in the past to increase by 30% or whatever that might be. So what that does is that's an active ping and then an offer of help.
Yeah.
Right? Introduce yourself, active ping, offer to help, ask for access. Simple, really
Yeah.
clear, really simple in terms of what it is that's there. Vivek, would you add anything to that? Again, I think what Walter's talking about, um,
Yeah. Seems simple. Yeah.
you
And
know, and,
yeah, sorry, Dave, go ahead.
no, Viv, I asked you a question. I should allow you to answer.
No, I was saying it's the important thing is to keep it simple, and really nail in the focus on why should I talk to you. And earlier we talked about one of the precursors to this whole webinar was how barriers to entry have actually reduced, which means everybody's trying to get access. And there's an old saying, I don't know if it translates very well, but so in a crowd of black umbrellas, the yellow one stands out, or something like that. But the point is, how do you make your request for access stand out from the rest? There's lots of creative things that I've seen come up very recently with videos and gifs and all that kind of stuff coming in as part of the message. But really, the simple here's, like you said, what is the active ping? Why should that person care? And give you a quick 10 to 15 minute
Exactly.
window for you to be able to talk to them,
Yeah.
and make a case for why they should talk more. I think
Yeah.
that's really
Right.
what we need to focus on, rather
Yeah.
than trying to tell them everything that you can do. Because,
And Vivek,
like
gimmicks
you said,
don't
they
work.
don't care.
Gimmicks
Yeah,
don't work. So don't spend a lot of time on you. Gimmicks don't work. And the other thing again that Walter's pointing out is that, but why do my salespeople make it so complex? And I
yeah,
asked a salesperson one time. I said, I'm reading your access message, and you gave them 4 things that are your active ping.
yeah,
Why? Why did we already talked about the simple process? Why? And their answer was, I don't think I'll get a chance to talk to him again. I said, by putting 4, you guarantee you won't get a chance to talk to him
yeah,
again,
exactly.
right?
Yeah,
Again, so the key thing there is, I like seeing salespeople that do some videos. Again, if they still are staying true to
yeah,
the simple structure. One
yeah,
thing I want. Tell me one thing that I can count on that you found as a priority that can connect to what you can how you can offer help. Not everything there,
yeah.
right? So that's the critical thing that you need to look at. And again, your
Reminds me of
objective.
recently I got a very creative set of prospecting messages from the same person, and I didn't respond to any of them, mainly because you're talking to the wrong person right from the beginning.
Yeah,
It's I'm not even close to anything that you're selling.
that means that you
Yeah,
haven't done the
you said
research, by the way, right?
exactly. So
Yeah,
all the creativity, I look at the email, the second, third one, I say good follow up. I smile, but I'm still not going to respond because it's irrelevant. And that poor person is been told to be creative and interesting and continue with it, but then the fundamentals are sort of wrong. So before we continue, we want to sort of get you guys back into the conversation. What's the most important takeaway from this webinar? If there's one thing that you could use, what would that be? So please let us know in the chat um, window.
Hey,
Thank you.
hey Phil, are we going to do the chat, or are you going to pop up a bot for us?
I'll put in a new
There
Oh,
you
there.
there you go.
go.
There's our new special area for
Look
what
at
is your
that.
most useful or idea or takeaway right below the video of Vivek and David.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And now is your chance also to
Yeah.
put in any questions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you
See,
put it in, yeah. So if you put the takeaway in chat, that's fine. We'll find it there too. But again, if you have any questions too, we're glad to sort of take time. We have a little bit of time that we can take on those particular things. What's the most important takeaway? What's one thing you can use?
So Walter just put in a question.
Yep, I see that. Cool. Well, hopefully there is something there, even though nobody's talking about it. Maybe we're going back to who is it that said the zone of indifference?
Right.
Um,
And
Jeff, I think.
well,
Forget who it was.
you've given us a lot to think about here. So I know
Yeah.
that oh, you can't type in the other.
Uh-oh.
Okay, I see a
Well,
response from an account.
type anywhere.
Type
Anywhere
anywhere.
you
Yeah.
can, right.
Yeah,
But
type
that's
anywhere. We've got both open
right,
here.
right.
Account
Yeah.
behavior spectrum was one of the things that came in.
There we go.
Assessing our key accounts relative to zone of indifference. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Keep it simple.
Who you
I'll leave
calling
the last one
stupid,
out.
Gary? Jeez. No,
Uh,
I usually use silly just because it's easier. Because if you put stupid in there, it's just too easy for me to make that joke. That's the point. Very good. Let's keep it in there. Keep going on this, by the way, in terms of things that important takeaway. And Walter asked the question: can you give us an example where you developed one or more of these strategies for an organization? What was the impact? How hard was it to get a salesperson to pay attention to the protecting the accounts and grow and expand? Frankly, I think that in most cases, the protect accounts and grow and expand is relatively easy. The harder part for us is the prospecting to get people,
Prospecting.
especially when you've got key accounts and you're doing key account management. That means I don't have to prospect anymore, do I? Oh my goodness
Yeah.
gracious, that's the harder part of it. Viv, do you have any examples? I know I do, but I wanted to see if you had any examples.
Yeah, I think you gave one as well, David, where we talked about the transactional one training workshop and then the next one and then the next one. But really, what that salesperson was able to do was to have strategic calls with different business units proactively, regularly, and to be able to make those connections and then work their way into understanding what critical success factors cut across all of those lines of business, and then be able to position that in a way that sort of, like you said, gave us the $1 million a year for X number of years to continue to grow and expand into that. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that same one started regionally and then went global as well, right? So we
Yep.
started doing that everywhere around the world. Um, the prospecting bit is one of those things that I think we all can do always more of. It's just one of those things where sometimes salespeople have key accounts, business is good, customers are happy. The first thing that sort of and you're busy servicing those accounts, so the first thing you sort of lose sight of is to keep that pipeline flowing. And sometimes it becomes a little too late. So the prospecting, like you said, that's sort of one of those things where we need to be a little more
Yeah.
cautious. Yeah, I'll get back to you for your example, David.
Yeah,
and
and the one we have, Phil, just a quick one. It was
sure.
a commercial airline that's again working with their business customers, and we put not only the strategic business call process in, critical success factor process in, but some of our other what we call advanced sales kinds of things. But as a result of that, it wasn't hard once you saw the value, because that's how we sold to them. So it wasn't hard for them to see the value in terms of doing that, for them to then take it. But they really took it very far in terms of
Mhm.
creating sort of a reinforcement, almost like people that are good at doing these kinds of skills. They got, the sort of the Six Sigma kind of belt kind of thing that they did,
Mm,
and really good results in terms of. I
Mhm.
don't know the exact number. I'm thinking 30% increase from a sales perspective, but I thought it might have been a little bit higher than that. But so it's easy to do that, especially if for us if we were selling that way in terms of the process.
Great. And we're just bumping up here to the hour, gentlemen. Well done. And also, I just put there's the article that we promised.
Perfect. Phil, thanks for doing that, and thank you everybody. Again, I appreciate everybody's attention, the questions, the comments, all the things that were there, and sort of staying with us across this call. We do have a couple other webinars that you'll see up on the SMM Connect website to get registered for those. Thank you, Philip. Appreciate you running us through and being there for us. Always really good support that we get from you. Thank you, Gary Van Antwerp. Thank you, SMM Connect, for this. Viv, anything else you want to say before we head off?
Just thank you, and thank you for all your comments and interaction. It was lovely to be here, and hopefully we'll get to meet again sometime soon. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Phil. We'll pass it over to you.
Great. Vivek and David, well done. Thanks so much. Don't forget to access that article from Wilson Learning. You can click on your screen or also directly there in chat. All this we'll post also with the recording, including today's handout. If you didn't have a chance to download that yet, it will also post with the recording in SMM Connect. So look for that just a little bit later today. Gentlemen, well done. Thank you so much. Time well spent here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And we look forward to seeing everybody back here at SMM Connect very soon. Don't forget to register for the next upcoming webinar with Michael Leimbach and David Yesford, Elevating Clients to Fierce Advocates, the Power of Post-Sale Mastery. Just click on the screen there on the lower left. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you back here very soon.
Thank you.